70s films really impressed me. And I liked that period in our film history because there was different worlds created, very special worlds. Well, you know, I love horror and I don't look down on it. I don't... I know there's lots of terrible horror. There's lots, but there's also lots of terrible dramas and comedies, and you know, even as from a young age, I would watch everything, and more obscure horror and lots of European horror. I'm very influenced by silent horror as well, like films like Vampire.
Mr Babadook, since he has escaped from an expressionist movie.
Yes, yeah, and you know, it wasn't like an intellectual decision, oh, I want to make a movie that looks like this movie or that movie. It's just an emotional connection with the aesthetics of these particular films. There's something about Méliès and all of the earlier films that feels very childlike, and but also quite sinister. And it felt very right for the film. And I wanted the film to feel handmade like those old films do. And so with the effects, they're all in camera. So I wanted almost to see the wires, not quite, but I didn't want it to look CGI or too sophisticated, because it wasn't the world of the film. I feel we lost something in film. Maybe, you know, in these early days of cinema, there was a real art, and they weren't ashamed of the theatricality of those films, and then things changed, and yeah, I'm really drawn to that era in films, and it's not usual filmmaking for Australians either. Ce n'est pas normal pour les films australiens. But at the same time, I didn't want to make a museum piece, so I had to make something that felt alive and that I felt was contemporary. Mm-hmm. So it's not just copying, I guess. The sound, I'm obsessed with sound, and I wanted to not tell an audience this is what you must feel now. I just wanted to be true to my feelings about fear. So often there's not sound, and that's more frightening for me than to have lots of music and sound giving cues. But in regards to music, my rule was I would only use music if I absolutely couldn't tell the story at that point with sound. So the sound would bleed into the music and become just that much more heightened. He's an amazing child, and I have so much love for him, and his mum and Essie and I really worked to protect him from the difficult things in the film, of which there are obviously a lot. And he's 6. It was terrifying for me to direct a 6-year-old. I'd written this film, and then the night before we started to shoot, I thought, oh my God, can he do this? You know. So it was a torturous challenge, but well worth it. I don't believe in tricking children into a performance. So it was very important to me that he understood the story of Babadook. And we spent 3 weeks together playing, and I took him to the zoo and I told him the story of the Babadook. And he was fascinated. I told him the child's version. And I said, you know, so basically, Noah, Sam he wants to save his mum, and, you know, it's a film about the power of love. And he said, oh, the power of love. And he was really committed, you know, after that. Really, he's a very old soul, and he was very focused. So by telling him the whole story, you know, you shoot out of sequence in a film, and I would say, oh, in this scene, this is what's happening, and he's like, oh, j'ai compris, you know, I understand. And his mum said to him one day, oh, you know, you're so focused here, you never focus at school. And he said, mais maman, c'est très important. What was important for me visually was to replicate the feeling of going crazy. And so I tried play with structure and take away what felt safe structurally. In a film, you have a scene, it ends, and another one begins. In this film, it starts normal, and then scenes start to bleed into each other. We lose track of time. Time compresses, it expands. So all these things start to make the audience, this is what I hoped, to make them feel unsafe. I really wanted them to feel what Amelia was feeling, not sit there intellectually going, oh yes, that's what it's like, but to actually start to feel like they couldn't breathe. I think, no one should have to witness their husband being killed violently on the way to the hospital, to have your child. And there are many people in life who have to suffer through terrible things. How do you reconcile that with a normal life? I don't think you can go back to the way you were before these kinds of things happened. So, you can't get rid of this thing. It just needs, you need to negotiate with it and find a way to live with it. And I was really preparing myself for lots of criticism from women. How can you portray a woman like this? But to be honest, we've had nothing. We've had a lot of women say, oh, thank God this role is on the screen. I can relax. I don't have to be perfect. It's been very comforting actually for women to see this role on screen. And I've never met a woman who is a mother who feels like they are a good mother. So maybe that has something to do with the lack of criticism. I remember a very difficult time in my life. I had a toothache. And it just went on and on and on. And there was nothing wrong with my tooth, apparently. Often when things are really strong, the body's trying to say, every part of you is trying to say, wake up, look at what's happening around you. So it was more abstract. Yeah. It's a visceral, I wanted something visceral, and the teeth is so close to the brain, and yeah, it's scary. It's something that scares me. Also cockroaches. I grew up in Queensland, and we have these big cockroaches, they fly in. And once my friend killed one, and it exploded, and it went down behind the cupboard, and like in the kitchen, and the next day I pulled out the box of cereal, and the head was still going. And so this for me is revolting. And there was a lot of the Babadook that felt like I don't like bugs, I don't like... so this was a personal part of the Babadook. Always the monster had to come, had to be relevant to the psychology of Amelia. So the way it moved, the way it threatened her, everything was about what was happening to her. And I didn't think about other monsters. And I saw very clearly that the Babadook has two layers, the child layer on the top and the adult layer on the bottom. And the child layer is the thing that covers. It's the hat, it's the face that could be a mask, it's the hair that looks like a wig. You don't see any skin, you see gloves, you don't see any feet. So in fact, for me, it's like an entity playing at being a human being. And so in the book it says, once I take off all of these things, then you have the real deal. Then you have the thing underneath that's really terrifying. And so this is how I knew it would work, the Babadook, as opposed to Freddy Krueger. And so there were two things that it fed off and got bigger from, was fear and denial. And the more fear and the more denial it was given, it would feed and become huge. A film that escaped me, I was not allowed to see it for a very long time, and then I just forgot about it, was The Exorcist. And I think, and as an adult I saw it, and I grew up as a Catholic. So for me, possession is, something in my DNA, terrifies me about that. And I had some friends staying over, and I had to sleep in their room with them. I was so scared. But also I think there were films I saw as a child, just coming into adulthood, like for a girl, this is a hard time, 12, 13. And any horror film I saw then, even if it wasn't scary, would terrify me, would So it's often about where we're at, I think, where films scare you. And just two other films quickly. There's a very beautiful, very simple but beautiful Australian film called Lake Mungo. Have you seen? It's worth watching if you can find it. But I watched this on my own. It's a film about a girl who... I won't tell you anything, but I watched it on my own and I actually got scared after that. I felt... it's also a film about grief, but it was very frightening for me. Yeah. I have two scripts that I'm writing. No. One of them is set in Tasmania in the 1820s, and it's a story. I feel like our history in Australia. It's a very violent history, and I want to go back and look at that from a female's perspective. And it's to be brief, it's a story of a convict woman who has terrible things happen to her, and she goes out to seek revenge on these soldiers, these high-class soldiers. So she travels through the centre of Tasmania, and it's like a revenge story that goes very wrong. So it's my feelings about revenge and violence, and from a female perspective. And so it's like Dante's Inferno kind of world. It was known as Hell on Earth in Tasmania in that period. It's a hell world, but it's not a horror story, a horror film. Ce n'est pas une comédie.